Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast. It's a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations to follow their dreams of career fulfillment and to live their best, most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast couldn't be possible without the support of Careerminds. Today, I am just so excited to welcome Angela Pointon. Angela's a fractional CMO who helps B2B companies get their marketing on a solid foundation and is focused on hypergrowth. She has over 25 years of marketing experience and has successfully exited and sold an award-winning marketing agency, 11 out of 11. Angela is a speaker, podcaster, and author of the book, Stop Blending In. She serves as committee co-chair of the Women's Initiatives at the Entrepreneurs Organization, Philadelphia chapter. Since launching her company in 2017, Angela has become such a dear friend to me. She has a few unique clocking out moments in her story that, quite frankly, I'm excited to share with you today. So without further ado, please enjoy Angela Pointon and her clocking out story. Angela, it's so good to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Raymond. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for context for our listeners, you and I met, I was just thinking about this. We met years ago. I don't know exactly the year, but it was after you launched your company, 11 out of 11. We became fast friends and was so impressed with your business, your marketing approach to digital marketing, and we hired your company, and you, for a couple of years, you provided digital marketing services for Careerminds, and then you end up selling your business.
What a joy to not only be able to be friends and peers with someone like you, but to be able to do business together is just the best. So
Yeah.
I fully enjoyed that. And it was one of the highlights of owning the company, truly, is really loving some of the clients.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. And it was a joy working with 11 out of 11. Your team was awesome. And I can't wait to kind of dig into some questions that I have about what that looks like. So don't want to spoil the ending there. But what I'd like to do is I love starting out with kind of the history behind Angela Pointon. And our listeners love a good origin story. So can you share where you grew up, what your parents did for a living, maybe siblings? Would love to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the town called Hillsborough, New Jersey. For anybody who's familiar, it's central Jersey, and it's just north of Princeton. When my parents bought the house, my mom was pregnant with me. I lived there until I went off to college. So my entire childhood was spent in the same house, which some people get to experience, not everybody. It was really special. And the street that we lived on was one of those like quintessential streets where kids are riding bikes and there's a park down the street and the elementary school you can walk to. It was just such a great place to grow up. It's now blown up and is a much larger community, but at the time it was really small. And I had 4 of my very best friends to this day lived on the same block as me. So we were always outside playing. In the house, my mom and dad, they're still married. It's been over 50 years they've been married. And my 2 brothers. I have 2 older brothers. As far as kind of like what childhood was like for me, for my family, my dad traveled a lot. It was weird for him to be home. Honestly, like it mostly was my brothers, myself, and my mom. And then when he was around, it was kind of like this extra being there we weren't used to having around. And he was a chemical sales guy. He worked in northern Jersey and he just had a territory and would have to travel to that territory and conferences and stuff like that all the time. So he wasn't home too much. My mom was a labor and delivery nurse. That's what she was trained to do. But she left that job when she had kids and she just worked part-time jobs here and there as we got older. She was always around.
So tell me about your siblings. You said you have two older brothers. What
Two
was it
older
like
brothers.
being the youngest sister in the family? And I'm curious what that dynamic was like.
Yeah, I was lucky. They were annoying, but good brothers. They're 4 and 6 years older than me, so there's a bit of an age gap. And they were both really different, both extremely into music, but different kinds of music, hung with different crowds. I looked up to both of them a
Mm,
lot for different reasons. And the like one thing I remember in my life most significantly is when my middle brother, the one who's, the younger of the two, went off to college and I was home alone with really my mom mostly and a little bit of my dad here and there.
mm,
That was a weird experience. Being the only child there was tough.
mm. In what way?
I was As none of us were super outgoing, but I especially was not used to being at the center of attention and having all that attention from parents on me right I was a sophomore in high school, in my like rebellion years
Mm,
was a bad mix. Growing up in that community as a young person was great, but it was very hard to get anywhere without a car.
mm,
And in New Jersey, you can't drive, or at least back then, I don't know what it is today, until you're 17. And so I was landlocked in that house and felt like I had a lot of eyeballs on me and wanted to be anywhere but there. I was
mm,
very eager to get out of there. And so that all mixing up at the same time in my life was tough.
mm. So I can only help but think that your brothers are now off to college and out of the house, graduate from high school. You're now a sophomore. You have a dad who's in and out. Your mom's working. You're now like an only child, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you really start to think about what your career was going to look like? And I'm curious if there was any influence on your parents and that age old question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
How did that evolve? And then being home alone, what did you start thinking about in terms of what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I was I mentioned kind of music was important to my brothers and therefore me because I looked up to them. I was the kid who was into punk rock and I skateboarded.
Mm,
And so all I wanted to do was go out with my friends on my skateboard, meet them up and like hang out all night and listen to music and go to shows. Through that community, I started to get involved in art. And my favorite classes in high school were anything creative. We were lucky. Our high school had a pretty rich art curriculum. We had a photo lab, we had a ceramic studio. You could take lots of art classes there. I took all of them. Like it was my happy space. I loved it. And so I remember very much telling my mom, I don't know what I want to do, but it has to have art. I would be so upset and depressed if I didn't have that outlet. Being in chemical sales and a nurse, like they were not artists. They did not know what to do with that.
yeah.
And so they did not want me to go to an art school. They felt like if I changed my mind, that would be tough if I went to a school with only art majors. But they let me apply to schools that had other majors and a art program inside of it. And so that was cool by me. I ended up applying to a bunch of schools. I was really keen on coming to Philadelphia. It had a skateboarding community. It had lots of venues to see punk rock shows. That meant it was home for me. And New York was a little scary and too big for me at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so Philly was a good fit. And so I applied to a couple of schools, Drexel being one of them. And I got into Drexel actually with an interior design major that the summer before I started, I changed to a photography major. So that
Mm.
ended up being the program I went to at Drexel.
So how did your parents react when you switch your degree to photography? I would imagine that they had some hope when you were thinking about design, because there's so many different career paths you can go with a degree in design, but photography, I mean.
Yeah. They were so disconnected, Raymond, they didn't know what to think. So, you've done the college experience with your daughter. I just went through it with my son. When you're in those tours and people are talking to you about the program, there's a bit of marketing in there to try and make it glossy and sexy and appealing. But there's also the reality of like, here are the types of jobs that your student can get. And so Drexel was really good at that. I felt like, they had the co-op program even back then. They had a pretty robust design school even back then. It's only gotten better. And they were very good, I think, at taking a family who had no idea what a career path could look like and at least giving a couple tangible examples of kids who had done internships and gone on to get good jobs in the design field. So with photography, I think they always pictured me ending up as a professional photographer. And although they couldn't understand that world as much, they could at least picture it. You see it in movies. Like there's some tangible aspect to that for them.
So what does one do with a photography degree? Are you working for yourself? And then how did that translate into something full-time where you're earning a paycheck?
Yeah. I graduated in 98. So it was before iPhones really went crazy and people had really good cameras in their pockets. But what I learned through that curriculum is that I knew I didn't want to make money with my camera. I did a co-op with a woman in New York who co-op internship, you can use them interchangeably, but she was an agent for professional photographers. So her job was getting photographers work. And I saw how cutthroat it was and how really the client drove the creative and what they wanted the images to look like, less so like it wasn't as artsy and, like do whatever you want. People are going to just pay you lots of money. I found it didn't work that way. And so my senior year, I went to like the head of the program and said, I don't know that I really want to do this, but I know I want to do something that involves advertising and photo together. And his advice was, you should really consider a degree in marketing. And so I graduated in June. By June 15th, I was applying to MBA programs that offered a specialization in marketing. So I didn't really go into the photo world other than those internships at all. I was back into grad school after that.
That is such a common path I think so many students take. I mean, that's the reality of figuring things out, right? You have an idea of what you want to be when you grow up. You grapple with your parents a little bit and negotiate to some degree on how will they pay for your college or help you get accepted into college, convincing them that you're open to whatever other ideas that may come up. You get in, you start your degree, you do an internship, and then that's when light bulbs start going off. It's either, yep, this is exactly what I want to do, or this is not at all what I want to do.
Right.
And that 4-year degree becomes a pivotal point to getting to the place that you ultimately want to be. It could be starting a new job in something different, or it could be continuing your education. And you did that to get your MBA. I think that's great.
It was great experience. I think the connections that the professors have, you think about it. Could I have not gone to school for that? I wouldn't have had the experiences, the life-changing things of living on your own and trying to build friendships when you know nobody and all those things. But at the center of it, the most critical thing for me was actually the head of the program. One, hooking me up with people within his network for internships, and two, kind of guiding me. Like he knew. We're doing reviews of photo crits and stuff at school. he knew, but not giving up and giving somebody the guidance they need. That was key for me.
Well, and I bet like when you're with your family and you're traveling, when you take a picture, you're probably taking a picture through a very different lens than most people who are snapping something on your iPhone. You're probably very maybe obsessive about. I'm horrible at taking pictures, by the way, and so you wouldn't like my pictures. But I would imagine that skill is playing itself forward to some degree.
Yeah. I think anybody with a design background is taking photos different than the common person. And to give you a tip, it's about looking around the frame. So I'm taking a picture of you, I'm always looking around what else is in there to like get it proportional. And, so
Okay,
that's a
good.
little trick. You can spin your eye around and your pictures will get better.
Love that. Well, thanks for the tip.
Uh-huh.
So, Angela, when's the moment when you woke up feeling like I want to be an entrepreneur? Was it something that you've always had a desire to want to start your own company? Obviously, marketing was your focus in your career. How much experience did you need? I know that you did do some stints working in marketing before launching your own business. And I just wonder, when was the moment that the light bulb sort of went off in your mind where you said, I want to start my own business one day and I don't want to work for a company?
It was a little different for me. So it wasn't a light bulb. What happened, Raymond, is I was working in a marketing agency pre 2020 COVID. I was commuting an hour each way, and my kids were both in daycare at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was tough. I was feeling the mom guilt rolling into daycare in the winter when it was dark outside, picking my kids up, being one of the last moms because there was a lot of traffic on the turnpike, kind of a thing. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I probably could have gone to therapy and dealt with it, but I didn't have the capacity for that back then. So I saved a bunch of money and I quit that job. And I did it in a way where there was like a 6-month transition. We hired my replacement. It was not abrupt, but I knew what the path I was about to head on. And from there, I started doing freelance work. So I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I thought of myself as mom with 2 young kids doing some freelance work to make ends meet. I did that for a few years, and then the partners, my bosses at that agency I left, approached me and said, hey, do you want to start an agency together? And so I had nothing to lose at that point. I was just doing freelance work, so I said, sure, why not? Let's try it. We don't need an office. We don't need a whole lot of equipment. I already have a computer. Let's go. And so it was really not even a 24-hour decision. It just was a decision like that. And then we started 11 out of 11. That's what the agency was. And very early on, I started dreaming about one day selling it. I thought this would be cool to build and sell and, treat as an asset. They were sort of on board with that. And we got into conversations somewhat seriously a few years in, where it became apparent to me, Raymond, that the 3 of us were never going to be able to sell this together because we all had different visions of what that looked like and how it was structured and the timing and all of that. And so my thought process was, I need to be able to do this on my own. It's going to be too hard to do it with all 3 and make all 3 happy. And so I bought them out. That was the hardest thing I've ever done next to selling. It was very challenging because they were close friends of mine, and that was tough. That was a tough conversation to have. They weren't expecting that. But we made it happen and we got it done.
I want to go back and ask a couple of questions around the transition from taking the train an hour each way, dropping the kids off at daycare. I know many people can relate to that. They have a very similar kind of structure, where there's the mom taking the kids, being responsible for picking up the kids, doing the 8 to 5 or the 9 to 5 job. And one of the struggles I think many people have with the transition that you talked about, going from, that structured day to more of a freelance situation, is the uncertainty of projects and where business is going to come from. And I wonder, how did you sort through figuring out how to transition from, obviously you had a lot of flexibility, and that's one of the drivers where, people go into their own business or a consultant role or freelance because they want the flexibility and they want to feel like they're giving equal time to family and work and not feeling like it's off balance. And so I wonder if you can share advice as well as you reflect back, what was the catalyst that got you to accepting the fact that it was going to be a rocky road in terms of business?
Mm-hmm. I'll share truthfully and transparently what helped me. And I think first, the type of person I am is I could have a lot of money and still live frugally. Like, I've never been the type of person that need to have a lot of things or fancy cars or crazy clothes. Like, I wore this shirt 3 days this week. You only know that because I told you.
It's a beautiful shirt, by the way. If you're listening in, it's a nice kind of flowered shirt. It looks clean. Did you clean it? Did you wash it?
I did.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I only wore this shirt once this week, but I wear it all the time because I love it.
There you go. So you get it.
I understand.
I've had people open my closet and be like, "This is all you have?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, I don't need a lot of access. Some people live different lifestyles than that. Mine made it easier, right? And so I don't know where that comes from, and that's probably a deeper conversation than we have time for, but that was a tool in my toolbox to be able to look at our expenses as a family and be like, I can do this. If I just do, coupon clipping and like really lean in, one, I'll have more time to be able to do stuff like that. We got down to one car as a family because I was going to be home. My husband takes the train. Like, we really looked at everything that we did expense-wise to really make it work. Mm-hmm. Because you're right. It is scary, especially when you have that predictability of a paycheck and you're going from that to crazy wavy line of income sometimes, but not other times. So that helped me just be able to sleep at night. The other thing, I think, like, what was the catalyst for being able to kind of be okay with that wacky income was figuring out how to offer something for freelance that wasn't a project. Projects are hard. You get 3 of them 1 month, 1 the next, none the next, right? That's hard to normalize from a revenue and income perspective. Mm-hmm. So I tried to figure out what kind of marketing services could I offer people every single month where they have me on retainer, even if it's a small retainer. And so I did things like social media management or ad campaign management, things that needed attention every single month, even if the retainer was just $1,000, right? And I was working with just a couple of clients. It worked for me. And the other thing I will touch on, the third thing, is you mentioned the word flexibility. Like, that freelance world is really attractive because of that flexibility. For me, the key word was always freedom. What can I do to gain freedom, but still be able to make money? And the exchange of being free, like not having to report to a boss or be in the office or travel that hour each way, like whatever those constraints were that just weren't working for me, how could I exchange maybe money differently and income differently for gains and freedom away from those things? That was always the mindset for me, still is to this day. Like right now, loving life because it has a lot of freedom to it. And where I was leaning towards selling and exiting, it was getting to a point where there was not a lot of freedom for the money exchange. So
That's
just,
interesting.
yeah,
That's such great advice. I love the word freedom over flexibility, because flexibility, I feel like you can have flexibility but still be very bogged down and not have a lot of freedom. And the idea of having freedom, it sort of gives you the ability to manage your schedule in a way. So it's almost like the flexibility leads to freedom if you do it properly,
if you do.
essentially. And yeah, I love that. So you talked about starting your own business, and you shared how you had partners that you launched your business. So tell me about, and we all know that you sold. I referenced earlier that you've sold your company. There's so many people out there who start their own business who really don't think about an exit strategy. I remember I started a company 17 years ago, and I never thought, like, what am I going to do with it? I was just so excited to start my own business, have the flexibility, and, kind of get started with a business card and a website. But it sounds like you actually had intention of what your exit was going to look like. Where does that come from?
It's a really good question. It was always from day one the focus and the end goal. I remember it wasn't called Philly 100 back then. It was whatever the name was before that I can't remember right now. But basically, Philly 100 had an event called Where's the Exit? And they had a speaker who was talking, and that was the name of his book. And I probably attended that month 2 of owning my business because I wanted to sign up for that kind of content. I was always hungry for it. And I don't know why it was an appealing thing for me. I always kind of scratched my head when I talked to entrepreneurs who would say to me, like, exit, what are you going to do with your time? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't wait to have time to do all the things. Like, there's so much to do. So it was always just a different mindset that I had. And the idea of building an asset, and maybe I can put it this way, because one of the things that I learned along the way that really stuck with me was when you have a business, for the entrepreneurs listening or people interested in entrepreneurship, when you have a business, a lot of your income is in that business, right? It's an asset. And if you look at your whole entire value as an individual and where you have income, whether it's your house, your cars, your bank account, whatever, your business is one of those things. There's value in there. And when it's in the business, it's at risk. You haven't taken it off the table from a risk perspective. As 11 out of 11 was growing, that percentage of my portfolio was very much at risk, right? It was in that risky category. And I wasn't super comfortable with that. And not only did I want to exit and sell, but as it got bigger, as we became more successful, as it generated more revenue, it definitely tipped the seesaw scale to be the area of most risk for me from a total value portfolio perspective for Angela. So that also became an attractive thing for me that helped fuel the fire, honestly, rightly or wrongly, into wanting to sell.
That's so interesting because, again, people that start their own business, I hear reference of it as their baby. their their personal project, and it's very personal. And I think that connection early on, as I was listening to you describe that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there was a connection and a passion around building 11 out of 11, but with the mindset going in that your end game is to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost like a certain connection that you have on the business, because so many people that start their own company get so connected to it that they can't seem to find a way to unravel and get disconnected in a way that they're actually exiting from that. And it sounds like you had the ability to sort of, I don't know, you tell me, how did you stay kind of like stay disconnected, or like how did you manage that?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I think there are two ways that you become entwined in it. One is mentally, it is my baby mindset. And the other is physically, with being involved in processes, have to review things, being the person in the seat who does something for the organization's growth. And for me, the mindset part was easy. It's not easy for everyone, but for me, going in, knowing I wanted to sell it, I never thought of it as my baby. The day after I sold it was glorious. There were no regrets, and there's still no regrets. Like, it's all good. So we had a healthy mindset share, myself and my business. From a physically being involved in things and kind of being entwined in it, and kind of, makes up a part of what you spend your time in, and therefore you feel very committed to it and involved in it. That grows better, in my experience, over time. Mm-hmm. So at first, when you start a business, really hard to all of a sudden have money, unless you have investors, to hire a bunch of people and get yourself out of the day-to-day. So for most entrepreneurs, it's steps. I'm going to hire somebody to execute the work. Then I'm going to hire somebody to be able to do sales. Then I'm going to hire somebody to manage operations. Whatever those steps are, to ultimately keep firing yourself from the various roles within the organization. That's what I did. And so I luckily was there enough the year I listed it for sale. There still could have been a couple of things I kept doing and to get momentum there. Ultimately, the buyer didn't care about my involvement in one or two things, so it all worked out. But that doesn't happen fast. That's usually the kind of thing that takes years to happen.
So you separated yourself from the business toward the end, where the team was doing all the day-to-day. You were almost in a position where you're sort of an advisor to your team.
I was. The only thing I was still doing, Raymond, was sales. And a lot of people think you can't sell a business until you're not doing sales, but the buyer had a sales team. And so all I needed to do was train them on my sales process, and they were happy to have their team take it over and execute sales and fire me from that role very quickly, which I was very eager to get fired from, by the way.
So how did you come up with 11 out of 11?
11 out of 11 was born not from Spinal Tap, because that's what everybody asks me. I've never seen the movie. It was really trying to be better than 10 out of the 10, trying to be better than other marketing agencies out there.
And there was a domain for that.
There was a domain for that. That was no problem. We didn't have to buy it off of anybody or anything. I think it was like $20.
I love it. That's fantastic. So what are the lessons learned that you can share as you've gone through selling your company? It's not, and kudos and congratulations for crossing the finish line, because, there's a statistic out there. I'm not exactly sure, but there's a percentage that it's like, a very small percentage of entrepreneurs get to a point where their business is actually in the black. They're growing. It's a company. They say it's usually 5 to 7 years. You hit that inflection point. But to be able to grow your company and being recognized as the fastest growing company and then selling it is remarkable. So kudos to you for that. But it's not easy. Selling your company and finding someone to buy it is not easy. And I wonder if you can share any lessons learned as you reflect back that you can share.
Mm-hmm. What I learned is not enough people talk about this. And so there's not a lot of information out there. I don't know if entrepreneurs are scared to ask, but I also think people don't share openly and transparently about their selling experience. So I am an open book. We could do a whole episode on the selling experience, but anybody is welcome to reach out to me. And I think, especially for women entrepreneurs, but really for any entrepreneur, to be able to hear somebody's experience share is helpful and should be happening more often. What I did, since there was a bit of a void for that, is read as many books. There's not that many of them. There might be 10 about selling a business, within a certain revenue range. I listened to as many podcasts as I possibly could, read as many articles as I could, and the well is not deep there, so you can do it too. I probably spent 6 months and felt like I read everything, and I'm not a fast reader. But that's how I learned. Also searching YouTube and like watching videos and trying to just anywhere I could get information, right? The other thing is, I think the keys to being able to sell, once you've done the right things in your business, the keys to being able to sell are relationships. And the people who have those relationships are usually M&A firms. They have a lot of connections with people who are interested in buying businesses. And I happen to get hooked up with one who specialized in marketing companies. And so there's no way I could have done this without them. It's hard to find that kind of industry niche. I got lucky, but there's generalists out there who also do a very good job, but they have the lists of people that they can market the business to that you probably don't have as an individual listener, individual entrepreneur, and they were critical to the success of that sale.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think that networking way ahead of time, a year ahead of time. So when you hit that point where you want to sell, just starting to network with bankers, attorneys, advisors, and finding that buyer is it's not, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that your buyer can also come from a variety of sources. It could be a strategic, it could be a private equity firm. Who was your buyer? You don't have to share the name, but was it a strategic buyer, and did you know who they were? I'm curious about how that happened.
Mine was I'd put them into two categories: strategic, and I'll tell you why, and also competitor. So a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of feeling like their competition is their enemy. And I get it. It's from a sales perspective, that's true. And you always get bummed out when you lose out to a competitor. But from a sale perspective, an exit perspective, competitors are great, viable exit path. And so the buyer of 11 out of 11 was another marketing agency. Our services overlapped 75%, meaning we did the same things. And then the 25% was what they were looking for, which was HubSpot capabilities. That's a marketing tool that we had proficiency in. They did not. And so that was attractive to them. And so they were growing by acquisition slowly, but growing by acquisition. And so they were looking for other competitive marketing agencies to purchase and grow that way. And if the marketing agency had a small element. The one that they purchased before 11 out of 11 was more branding. So that was an element they didn't have in-house at the time. If the agencies had a small element that was a win for them and expanded their portfolio of services, that meant it was a good fit.
So what are you doing today now that you're on the other side?
I am doing some what I call fractional CMO consulting. And so with every exit, there's a non-compete clause. In our non-compete clause, this is something that I wanted permission to be able to do. I love helping companies with marketing strategy. It's something I missed running 11 out of 11. I did a little of it with my side time that I had, but I really wanted to focus on that probably for the next handful of years. Just working with a few clients at a time that really, they don't need a full-time chief marketing officer. They're not ready for that, but they still want to get the brains of somebody like that with a lot of marketing experience to know what to do. And so that's what I'm offering.
That's fantastic. I love that. And I love that you still have the freedom, even more freedom today. And I can't help but think when you look at the picture of your entire career, that mom and dad are probably like, well, look at our photographer. And the fact that your dad is probably, the salesperson on the road. I'm sure you took some of that. You have some of that, kind of that sales mindset that I'm sure he's taken some credit for.
Yeah, I'm sure. They're very good. It's a very good story of you never can know what your kids are going to do. It's all about like guiding them and helping them find their path of happiness, whatever that means to them, right? I feel like we were a great partnership there. They let me have the freedom, even for the things that they didn't understand, like art. And it led to this, and I couldn't be happier.
That's great. I'm sure they're super happy with the outcome, and they're proud. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thanks,
Angela,
Raymond.
this has been great. I so appreciate you carving some time out here. I love hearing the story. I've gotten bits and pieces of it throughout our friendship, and it's really nice to hear how everything has come together. Just really happy for all of your success and kind of where you are today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raymond. Always good chatting with you.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Careerminds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. If you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future, and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.